So if you've been programming for any number of years or you're just learning to code, you've probably gotten stuck on a problem before or just stuck on a bug that you just couldn't figure out for a long period of time. So what I want to share is not specific tips to a certain problem, but some just general things you can do to try to help you get some sort of progress, because we know that that little bit of progress that we make can eventually get us to the end, like hopefully help you have an easier time with bugs, which is one of the most terrifying things about coding and one of the most frustrating things about coding is getting stuck on something for a real long time. The first tip I have is to break the problem down. Break it down into sub problems. Think about the architecture that you have and break down each piece into a separate problem itself. Like if you know you're seeing one thing, sometimes we think a little bit too high level, and just bring it down and say, let me just make sure this part of the thing is working first before I move on to trying to think about the whole thing. So if that's like an HTML page, maybe depending on the issue, maybe I start looking at the CSS first, making sure that's fine. Then I look at the HTML, make sure that's fine. And then I look at the JavaScript to make sure that's fine. It just depends on what you're working with, what the problem is. But like figure out how to break it down into more smaller, manageable pieces that can help you one by one as you rule things out, help you finally target it on the solution or the area where the problem is, because you basically narrow things down. The simple process of elimination method works tried and true, through anything that you're dealing with. The next tip I have is solve the problem manually. And what I mean by that is you want to think about the problem in your head instead of just keep trying to run it and change code. Think about the problem in your head and even go line by line through the code if you have to, thinking about the problem that the code is trying to solve and just reading it out and just making sure that what the code is doing is what you think it should be doing based on its purpose in the problem that the code is trying to solve or the thing the code is trying to do. And so oftentimes when we do that, when we read it aloud or we trace through the code line by line, we'll start to notice that what we're thinking doesn't align with what we're actually seeing the code doing or seeing how this code is written. And sometimes that's hard to do unless you literally go line by line or you literally look at the code and think through the problem and just make sure, instead of just keep trying to throw different code changes at it, trying to fix it, just go through the code line by line and think about what it's doing. And even in your head first, before you even look at the code, but just think about each step of what needs to happen and then look at the code and make sure that it aligns to each step. And it's crazy, but it seems weird, but sometimes our eyes overlook things when we're looking at code too long. And sometimes like you do that and you end up finding something that doesn't match up from what you think it should do versus what's actually written down on code. And that can help you kind of figure out the answer. And plus you just need to know better logically what the software is doing anyway that can help you solve the issue. The next thing to try is explaining it to someone else. So often it's similar to the last one. Often when you just talk the problem out that the thing is trying to solve, you'll hear something that doesn't align with what the code is actually doing and what you're seeing running. And just that process of explaining and describing a problem can just open up a different thought on it. And then the person also might have some feedback that might help you and maybe thinking about it in a different way that you can't think about it, either due to their experience or their different point of perspective or just the fact that they ain't been sitting here looking at the problem all day like you have. The next thing to try is also similar to the last thing, is to draw it out with pseudocode. So that's similar to explaining it to yourself in your mind. But sometimes instead of writing code, you may need to just draw out a diagram of what the flow is of like how, the problem you're trying to solve or the thing you're trying to, figure out. And so I think that pseudocode helps you without getting so bogged down in the code. You write kind of like a fake code that just logically explains what's going on before going to the code. And this helps for figuring out bugs and for just figuring out new solutions of new things that you're trying to code. And just drawing out that solution gets the logic in your mind of what the problem you're trying to solve or the bug you're trying to fix or whatever the case may be. Another thing is don't reinvent the wheel. This maybe leans towards something new that you're building, but even for problems that you have, like most things have been solved already by somebody before in some form or fashion. So just make sure that, you're not reinventing the wheel, especially if you're creating something new. Sometimes you maybe just don't need to do what you're trying to do. You just need to kind of give up for another lack of expression and use a third party service, a third party library to do what you're trying to do. Because sometimes we get stuck on trying to just solve everything and write all the code ourselves, when really we should be writing code for new problems and not writing code for old problems that have been solved. Like if your company is asking you to build this new proprietary system that does something that never was done in the world before, they want you writing code specific to the new problem that is custom code that hasn't been written anywhere else. They typically don't want you just reinventing the wheel for, something that has already been done before in a library or something that you can use, that can reuse. And sometimes that's the problem you're running into. You're trying to do something that you really don't need to be doing. Like everything's been solved before, but there's also like custom code that you need to optimize for your company that you can't get anywhere else. And last but not least, just walk away from the computer. Sometimes you just got to get up, get away from the computer, go take a shower, go take a walk, go get something to eat, go talk to somebody, go to sleep, whatever the case is. But you never know what you can get from just going away. Sometimes you keep thinking about the problem and someone just pop in your head out of nowhere and you'll run back to the computer like, dang, I never even thought of that. But sometimes just constantly focusing on the computer, focusing on the code, it's just hard to see until you take that step back. So sometimes you just got to get up and walk away. And that's my last tip. So I love to hear what your tips are. I love to hear what your feedback are on my tips. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, and share this depending on what platform you're on. I appreciate you watching, and let's start a discussion about it. I hope this helps somebody, and I'll see you later. Thanks for watching the video.